John was a man who carried too much on his shoulders. Life had not been easy for him, yet he never complained. People around him would often say he looked tired, but they never saw the quiet strength in his eyes. He worked in a warehouse, lifting boxes day and night, and came home each evening with sore arms and an aching back. Still, when he walked through the small door of his rented apartment, his face softened into a smile. That smile was not for him. It was for his little boy, Ethan. Ethan was only 6 years old, but to John, he was the very reason life kept moving forward. Every morning, John made sure Ethan had breakfast before school, even if he himself only drank coffee to save money. Every evening, he helped Ethan with homework, even when his own eyes were half closed with fatigue. And every night, John whispered to his son that tomorrow would be a better day. Those words were not only for Ethan, they were also for himself, a way to keep hope alive in a life that had become a constant struggle. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms, but John did his best to make it feel like home. A faded curtain covered the window. The couch was second-hand and had a tear at the corner. Still, there was always laughter inside. Ethan's drawings filled the walls, colorful pictures of superheroes and smiling suns. John never had money for expensive toys, but he had time, and that was what Ethan treasured most. They played with building blocks, told stories at bedtime, and sometimes simply sat together watching the world outside their window. But beneath the surface of their happy moments, John worried constantly. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter. Rent was always due. The car made strange noises each morning, threatening to break down at any moment. John tried to hide these worries from Ethan, but a child can sense more than adults think. Ethan would sometimes place his small hand on his father's arm and say, "Daddy, don't be sad." Those simple words gave John strength, though he wished his son never had to notice his burdens. One cold evening, everything changed. John returned home from work to find Ethan lying on the couch, his face pale and his body weak. He touched the boy's forehead and felt heat burning through his skin. Panic rushed into John's chest. He had seen his son catch colds before, but this was different. Ethan's small body trembled, and his eyes seemed distant. John tried to remain calm, telling his son everything would be all right, but inside, he was terrified. Without a second thought, he scooped Ethan into his arms and rushed outside. The winter wind cut across his face as he hurried to the car. He placed Ethan gently in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket, and drove as fast as the old vehicle would allow. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with fear. "Please, let him be all right," John whispered again and again. The hospital was 15 minutes away, though every second felt like an hour. John kept glancing into the rearview mirror, watching his son's small figure curled up under the blanket. He remembered the promise he had made to Ethan's mother years ago, back when life was different. He had promised to always protect their son, no matter what. That promise echoed in his heart now, pushing him forward even as fear pressed down on him. When they reached the hospital, John lifted Ethan into his arms and rushed inside. The bright lights of the emergency room stung his tired eyes. Nurses moved quickly around him, guiding him toward the front desk. He filled out the paperwork with shaking hands, writing Ethan's name, his age, and his symptoms. His voice cracked when he explained what had happened, but the staff listened with calm professionalism. John sat down in the waiting area with Ethan still leaning against him. He could hear the sounds of machines beeping, people talking in hushed voices, and footsteps echoing down the hallway. It was a world of both hope and fear, and John felt caught between the two. He stroked his son's hair and whispered that everything would be fine. Ethan looked up at him with tired eyes and tried to smile. That smile, weak as it was, pierced John's heart. It was as if Ethan was telling his father not to worry, as if he knew how heavy the world already was on John's shoulders. The boy's innocence, his quiet bravery, filled John with both pride and sorrow. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly as they waited. John thought of all the things he still wanted to give his son. He dreamed of a bigger home, of weekends at the park, of a life where Ethan never had to worry about his father's tired face. Those dreams felt far away now, replaced by one urgent wish, that his little boy would simply be healthy again. The automatic doors opened and closed as people came and went. John sat still, holding his son close, praying in silence. He remembered the nights when Ethan was a baby, how he would walk the floor for hours, rocking him to sleep. He remembered the first time Ethan said, "Daddy," and the joy that had filled the room. He remembered the laughter, the hugs, the simple moments that meant everything. Those memories gave him strength now, reminding him why he could never give up. As the night deepened, John's exhaustion grew, but he would not let himself rest. Every time Ethan stirred, John whispered softly to comfort him. His own body ached, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was the small boy in his arms, the boy who was his entire world. And then, in the middle of his fear and exhaustion, something unexpected happened. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes still heavy but curious. He pointed across the hallway, where a group of hospital staff walked with a woman at the center. She was dressed in a neat suit, her presence commanding respect. Nurses greeted her warmly, and doctors nodded as she passed. With surprising clarity for a sick child, Ethan whispered words that froze John in place. "Daddy, that's Mommy." John's heart stopped. For years, Ethan had never spoken that word. For years, it had been just the two of them. And now, in this strange place filled with worry and hope, his son was pointing at a woman John had never seen before. A woman who looked nothing like the life they lived. A woman who carried herself with confidence and authority. John held his son tighter, his mind spinning. Who was she? And why did his son believe she was his mother? The night that began with fear was about to open a door neither of them expected. John sat frozen in the hospital waiting room, Ethan still leaning against his chest. His son's words kept echoing in his mind. "That's Mommy." The boy had said it so clearly, with no hesitation, as if it was the most natural truth in the world. Yet John knew this could not be possible. Ethan's mother had left long ago. She had walked away when their son was still a baby, leaving John to raise him alone. Since then, there had been no contact, no letters, no sign of her presence. Still, Ethan had pointed at that woman with such certainty. John could not stop himself from glancing across the hallway again. The woman walked with calm authority, her footsteps steady, her back straight. The nurses around her smiled with admiration. She looked like someone important, someone who belonged, in this place of order and healing. Her elegant suit made her stand out even more, a symbol of a life far removed from John's world of warehouse work and second-hand furniture. John lowered his eyes quickly, not wanting to be noticed. He whispered to Ethan, asking softly why he thought that woman was his mother. Ethan, tired but insistent, simply nodded and said again, "Daddy, it is Mommy." Then he closed his eyes and leaned into his father's shoulder, as if that statement was final. The moment filled John with confusion. He wanted to dismiss it as the imagination of a sick child. Children sometimes said things that made no sense, especially when fever clouded their minds. Yet the way Ethan had spoken felt different. There had been no dreamlike uncertainty in his tone. It had been spoken with a quiet confidence that shook John's heart. A nurse approached, calling Ethan's name. John quickly rose and carried his son into a smaller room. The nurse checked Ethan's temperature, blood pressure, and breathing, then explained that the doctor would see him shortly. John thanked her, though his voice was unsteady. The weight of worry pressed harder on his chest. While they waited, John's mind wandered back to the years behind him. He remembered the day Ethan was born, the joy he had felt holding his son for the first time. That memory was followed by the painful one of the woman who had given birth to him, walking out the door when responsibility became too heavy. John had begged her to stay, but she had chosen another path. Since that day, he had promised himself never to let Ethan feel abandoned again. Now here he was, sitting in a hospital with his sick child, watching as fate twisted itself in strange ways. He could not understand why Ethan would recognize a woman he had never met, unless life was preparing him for something he could not yet see. The doctor entered, a kind, middle-aged man with gentle eyes. He examined Ethan carefully, asking questions about his symptoms. John answered each one as clearly as he could. The doctor assured him that Ethan would be all right, but would need some tests to be safe. Relief washed over John, though worry still lingered in his heart. As the doctor left, John leaned back in the chair, exhausted. He kissed his son's forehead and whispered that everything would be fine. Ethan stirred and gave him a faint smile, one that reminded John of all the reasons he fought so hard every day. Suddenly, movement caught John's attention again. Through the half-open door, he saw her, the woman Ethan had pointed to earlier. She stood at the end of the hallway, speaking with two doctors. They listened carefully, nodding at her words. Even from a distance, her presence commanded respect. John tried to look away, but curiosity held him still. Something about her felt strangely familiar, though he could not place it. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, or the tone of her voice that faintly reached his ears. He shook his head, telling himself not to dwell on it. His son needed him more than any unanswered question, yet fate seemed determined to close the distance between them. A few minutes later, the sound of footsteps approached. The woman herself appeared at the door, her eyes scanning the room. She paused when she saw John and Ethan, and a gentle smile formed on her lips. "Is he your son?" she asked softly. John nodded, caught off guard by her sudden presence. "Yes," he replied, his voice hesitant. "He's beautiful," she said, kindly, stepping a little closer. "I saw him earlier. He seemed to recognize me." John's heart skipped a beat. He swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. "Children sometimes say strange things," he murmured. "He's not feeling well." The woman studied him for a moment, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something John could not identify. She turned her gaze back to Ethan, who now opened his eyes again. The boy looked at her with an expression that was not fear but calm recognition. His small lips moved, forming the same word once more. "Mommy." The room fell silent. John felt heat rising in his chest. He wanted to explain, to correct his son, to avoid any misunderstanding. But the woman's eyes softened as if the word had touched something hidden within her. She crouched slightly, bringing herself to Ethan's level. "Hello there," she said warmly. "You look very brave." Ethan smiled faintly and reached out a small hand. Without hesitation, she took it, her fingers gentle around his. The moment was brief but powerful, leaving John speechless. Before he could say anything, a nurse called for her from the hallway. She released Ethan's hand and gave John a polite nod. "Take good care of him," she said, then stepped away with quiet grace. As she walked off, John sat frozen, his mind in turmoil. Who was this woman really? Why had his son recognized her so strongly? And why did he, deep inside, feel as though her presence carried echoes of a past he had tried to bury? The night in the hospital stretched on, but for John it was no longer only about illness and recovery. It was about questions that refused to be silenced, questions about fate, about the bond between a child and a stranger, and about the possibility that life had just opened a door to secrets long hidden. He looked at his son, who was now resting peacefully, and whispered a silent promise. No matter what truth awaited them, he would stand by Ethan's side. Always. The long night at the hospital slowly turned into morning. The waiting room that had been filled with restless families now grew quieter. John had not slept at all. He sat in the chair beside his son's bed, his back stiff, his eyes heavy. Yet, he would not allow himself to close them. He kept his hand gently resting on Ethan's small arm, as if afraid that letting go would somehow make his boy slip away. Ethan was resting better now. The fever was lower and his breathing steadier. The doctor had assured John that with rest and medicine, Ethan would recover soon. That should have brought comfort, but John's mind was far from calm. He could not stop replaying the events of the night before. The moment his son had pointed to the woman, the certainty in his voice, and the way the woman had looked back at them. When John closed his eyes for just a moment, her face appeared clearly. She had eyes that seemed to carry both strength and hidden sorrow. Her presence had shaken something deep within him. It was not just Ethan who had felt a strange recognition. John, too, felt an echo, though he fought to push it aside. The morning light crept through the blinds, painting soft lines across the room. A nurse entered with a gentle smile, checking Ethan's chart. "He's improving," she said kindly. "You can take him home later today, but please make sure he rests and drinks plenty of water." John thanked her, relief washing over him, yet his heart was still heavy. He leaned closer to Ethan and whispered, "We're going home soon, buddy." The boy nodded weakly, his lips curling into a tired smile. But as John packed their few belongings into a small bag, he felt the weight of his challenges pressing harder. The hospital visit would mean bills he could not easily pay. His job already stretched him thin, and missing work to care for Ethan would only make things harder. He thought of the rent due at the end of the week, the overdue electricity bill, and the groceries he needed to buy. It felt like standing in the middle of a storm with no shelter in sight. He tried to hide his worry from Ethan. The boy had always been sensitive to his father's moods. But John's silence spoke louder than words. Ethan reached out his small hand, tugging gently at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, don't be sad," he whispered, his voice soft but steady. John swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I'm not sad, buddy. I'm just tired." Yet inside, his heart ached. He wanted to give his son a life free of worries, but every day seemed to test his strength. And now, as if his struggles were not enough, fate had thrown in a mystery. That left him even more unsettled. They were about to leave when John saw her again. The woman. She stood at the end of the hallway, speaking quietly with a group of doctors. The light from the window caught her face, and John felt his chest tighten. He turned quickly, hoping Ethan had not noticed, but it was too late. "Daddy," Ethan said, pointing again. "Look." "Mommy." The word cut through the air like a sharp blade. John's hands trembled. He wanted to tell his son to stop, to forget, but Ethan's innocent eyes looked at him with trust. He could not scold him for something he did not understand. The woman glanced toward them and noticed Ethan pointing. Her eyes met John's, and for a moment the noise of the hospital seemed to fade. There was something in her gaze, something that made John feel as though she knew him, or perhaps had once known a life like his. She gave a polite nod before walking away, leaving John with more questions than answers. As they walked toward the exit, John's mind raced. Who was she really? Why did Ethan see her as his mother? Could it be a coincidence? Or was there a truth hidden somewhere in the shadows of the past? Outside, the cold morning air bit against John's face. He wrapped Ethan tightly in a blanket and carried him to the car. On the drive home, Ethan spoke, softly from the back seat. "Daddy, Mommy is nice." She smiled at me. John's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Ethan," he said gently, "sometimes our minds play tricks when we are sick. That lady is not your mommy. She is someone important at the hospital. But Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, Daddy. I know it's her." John had no answer. He drove in silence, his heart heavy with confusion. Back at their apartment, John settled Ethan into bed. The boy soon drifted into sleep, his breathing calm. John sat by the window staring out at the busy street below. Cars moved, people hurried. Life went on as usual. But for John, nothing felt usual anymore. His thoughts returned to the woman again and again, the way she had looked at Ethan, the way she had touched his hand with such tenderness. It was not the behavior of a stranger. It was something deeper, something almost maternal. John shook his head, telling himself not to create stories out of nothing. Yet his heart refused to let go. Later that day, as Ethan slept, John received a call from the hospital about paperwork. He needed to return, the next morning to sign some forms. The thought filled him with unease. He did not want to face that woman again, yet part of him knew he had to. There were questions building inside him, questions that demanded answers. That night, John could not sleep. He sat by Ethan's bed, listening to his son's steady breathing. The apartment was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Each tick felt like a reminder that time was moving forward, whether he was ready or not. He thought of the life he had built, the sacrifices he had made, the love that had carried him through each day. He had always believed he could handle whatever challenge came his way. But this was different. This was not about rent or bills or work. This was about the very core of his son's heart. If Ethan believed that woman was his mother, what would happen if the truth was different? Would it break his heart? Would it create questions John could never answer? And what if, in some unimaginable way, Ethan was right? John placed his head in his hands, torn between fear and hope. He whispered softly, "I will protect you, Ethan, no matter what comes." Morning was not far away, and with it would come another meeting at the hospital, a meeting that might hold answers, or perhaps open doors to challenges he had never imagined. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the sky with soft shades of gold. John had barely slept. He sat at the edge of his small bed, rubbing his tired eyes, while Ethan still rested under the blankets. The boy's fever was almost gone, and his breathing sounded stronger. That was the good news. Yet John's heart carried a storm that no sunrise could calm. He knew he had to return to the hospital to finish paperwork, but he also knew it meant walking back into the same place where the woman had appeared. He looked at Ethan, who stirred slightly in his sleep and thought of the words spoken at the hospital. "That's Mommy." The innocence in his son's voice haunted him. John had tried to convince himself that it was only a fever dream, a mistake from a child's imagination. But deep down, he knew there was more to it. The look in the woman's eyes, the way she held Ethan's hand, the warmth in her smile, it had not felt random. By mid-morning, John carefully dressed Ethan and gave him a small breakfast. The boy was weak, but insisted on going with his father. "I want to see Mommy again," Ethan said simply, his eyes shining with a strange certainty. John froze, holding the spoon in his hand. "Ethan, that woman is not your mommy," he replied, gently. "We are only going back for some papers," but Ethan shook his head. "You'll see, Daddy." The drive to the hospital was quiet. John's hands tightened around the steering wheel. His mind fought between fear and curiosity. He wanted answers, but he was afraid of what those answers might bring. Life had already been difficult, and he wondered if facing the truth would make it harder. When they arrived, the hospital lobby was busy with people moving in and out. John carried Ethan through the crowd, trying to focus only on the paperwork, yet his heart raced with every step, afraid of running into her again. At the reception desk, he signed the documents the nurse gave him. It should have been quick and simple, but fate had other plans. From the corner of his eye, he saw her, the woman. She was walking down the hallway, her confident steps steady, her face calm but thoughtful. She was speaking with a group of staff members, yet when her eyes lifted, they found John and Ethan immediately, as if she had been expecting them. Ethan's small hand tugged at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, look! Mommy!" The words came again, firm and sure. John felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. He could no longer pretend it was only a child's imagination. The truth, whatever it was, stood right in front of him. The woman excused herself from the group and walked toward them. John's chest tightened as she approached. She stopped a few steps away and gave a gentle smile. "Good morning," she said kindly. "I am glad to see your son looks better today." John nodded stiffly, unsure how to respond. "Yes, he's recovering," he managed to say. Ethan reached out his hand toward her again. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice filled with trust. "Bye." Woman's expression softened and something flickered in her eyes, something between surprise and recognition. She knelt slightly, meeting Ethan's gaze. "Hello, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice warm. "You are very strong." John's breath caught. There was a tenderness in her tone that did not belong to a stranger. He felt torn, his heart demanding answers, but his pride holding him back. The woman looked up at John, her eyes steady. "May I speak with you privately?" she asked. John hesitated. His instinct was to protect his son, to keep him away from anything uncertain. Yet he also knew he could not walk away forever. With a slow nod, he agreed. A nurse offered to watch Ethan for a short while in the children's play area. The boy reluctantly let go of his father's hand, but smiled at the woman once more before leaving. That smile felt like a bridge, connecting two worlds John had tried to keep separate. Now alone with her, John felt the weight of silence between them. Finally, he spoke. "Why does my son think you are his mother?" His voice was calm but carried, the force of years of unanswered questions. The woman took a slow breath. "Because," she began carefully, "I am his mother." The words struck John like a blow. He shook his head, unable to accept them so easily. "No," he said firmly. "His mother left us years ago. She walked away and never looked back." Her eyes filled with emotion. "I never stopped thinking about him," she said softly. "I made choices back then that I regret every day. Life pushed me down a path I thought was right, but it cost me the most precious thing I ever had." John stared at her, his chest rising and falling with anger and confusion. "You left me to raise him alone. Do you know what that was like? Do you know how many nights I carried him when he was sick? How many mornings I went to work with no sleep? How many times I promised him everything would be fine even when I had nothing?" Tears shone in her eyes, but she did not look away. "I know I cannot erase the past. I know I failed you both. But when I saw him yesterday, something inside me broke open. I saw the child I never stopped loving. And he recognized me. Without being told, without being shown, he knew." John's anger softened into silence. He could not deny what he had seen with his own eyes, his son's certainty, the connection between them. Yet his heart was torn. He had built his life around protecting Ethan, around being both mother and father. Letting her back in felt like risking everything. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hospital hallway bustled around them, but it felt as though the world had gone quiet. Finally, John sighed heavily. "If you want to be in his life, you must prove it. You cannot disappear again. He is not just a child. He is my whole world. I will not let him be hurt." She nodded, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I understand. I do not want to hurt him. I only want to know him, to love him the way I should have from the start." John looked at her closely, searching for truth in her eyes. What he saw was not perfection, not certainty, but genuine remorse and longing. It was enough to plant a seed of possibility in his heart. When they returned to Ethan, the boy's face lit up. He reached for both of them, his small hands bridging a gap years wide. John felt his chest tighten as he watched the woman kneel beside their son. Something had shifted. The turning point had come, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were unlike any John had known before. His small world, once filled only with the routine of work and raising Ethan, now carried a new presence. The woman who had stepped back into their lives, Olivia, had not disappeared. After that first meeting, she called to check on Ethan. She asked permission to visit, and every time she came, Ethan's face brightened with a joy John had not seen before. At first, John kept his distance. He sat in the corner of the room while Olivia and Ethan spoke. He watched every gesture, every word, making sure she was careful with his son's fragile heart. He still carried the memory of being abandoned, and he refused to let history repeat itself. Yet what he saw surprised him. Olivia was patient. She did not overwhelm Ethan with questions or promises. Instead, she listened. She admired his drawings on the wall. She laughed at his simple jokes. She let him guide the moments, and Ethan responded with trust that seemed natural, as though he had been waiting for her all along. One afternoon, Olivia arrived with a small box in her hands. Inside was a set of colored pencils and a sketchbook. Ethan's eyes widened in delight. "For me?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Yes, for you," Olivia replied with a smile. "I thought you might enjoy having new colors to make. Your art even brighter." Ethan hugged the gift to his chest. He ran to his little table and began drawing right away, his small hands moving quickly over the paper. Olivia sat beside him, her eyes soft with affection. John watched from across the room, his heart conflicted. He had never been able to buy such gifts for his son. Every coin he earned went to food, rent, and the basics of survival. A part of him felt grateful that Ethan had something new to enjoy, but another part felt uneasy. Would Olivia's presence make his own efforts seem small? That night, after Olivia had left, John tucked Ethan into bed. The boy looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Daddy," he whispered, "Mommy is nice. Can she come again tomorrow?" John's chest tightened. He brushed his son's hair gently and said, "We will see, buddy. Rest now." When Ethan finally drifted to sleep, John sat by the window, staring out at the dark street. He felt torn between two truths. On one side was the life he had built, hard and humble, but steady. On the other side was this woman who had returned, bringing with her not only comfort, but also painful reminders of the past. Could he truly allow her back into their lives? Could he trust her not to leave again? The following week, Olivia invited them both to the hospital garden. It was a bright, open space filled with flowers and benches. Ethan ran among the paths, his laughter echoing through the air. Olivia and John walked slowly behind him. For the first time, John allowed himself to speak openly. "Why now?" he asked quietly. "Why, after all these years?" Olivia's eyes followed Ethan as he played. "Because I was afraid," she admitted softly. "When I was younger, I thought I could not handle the responsibility. I told myself it was better for you and the baby if I stepped away. But I was wrong. I built a career. I gained respect. Yet none of it filled the emptiness inside me. Seeing him that night in the hospital was like being given another chance. I do not deserve it, but I want to try." Her honesty struck John. He could see the regret in her face, the weight she carried. For a moment, his anger softened. He had spent years resenting her absence. But standing here, he realized that the woman before him was not the same as the one who had left. Life had changed her, just as it had changed him. Later, Ethan came running back, holding a small flower in his hand. He gave it to Olivia and said, "This is for you, Mommy." She took it with tears in her eyes, pressing it gently to her heart. John looked at the scene, his throat tight with emotion. He could not deny the bond forming between them. It was real, natural, and deep. Over the next few weeks, Olivia became more present. She joined them for dinners, bringing simple dishes she cooked herself. She helped Ethan with his schoolwork, showing patience that surprised even John. She did not try to take over. Instead, she added warmth to the home in small, steady ways. For John, the change was not easy. He had built his identity around being both mother and father. Letting someone else step in felt like surrendering a part of himself. Yet he also saw the happiness in Ethan's eyes, the way the boys' laughter filled the apartment more than ever before. That happiness was something John could not ignore. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, John and Olivia sat in the quiet living room. The light from the small lamp cast soft shadows on the wall. For a long time, they said nothing. Finally, Olivia spoke. "You are an incredible father," she said gently. "You gave him everything I could not. You sacrificed more than anyone should have to. I know I cannot erase the pain I caused, but I want to stand beside you now, not against you." John's eyes lowered. "I do not know if I can trust you yet. My son depends on me. If you leave again, it will break him. I cannot let that happen. I will not leave," Olivia said firmly. Her voice carried a strength that John had not expected. "I lost too much already. I will not lose him again." Her words lingered in the air, heavy but hopeful. John looked at her and saw not the woman who had once walked away, but someone who was willing to fight for a second chance. The days that followed showed small but steady growth. Ethan's health improved, and so did his spirit. He began drawing, pictures of 3 people instead of 2, himself, his daddy, and his mommy. When John saw those drawings taped to the wall, his eyes filled with quiet tears. His son's heart had already accepted what his own still struggled to believe. John knew the journey ahead would not be simple. Forgiveness would take time. Trust would take patience. But as he watched Ethan laughing between them, he realized something important. Sometimes growth does not come from holding on tightly to the past. Sometimes it comes from opening the door, even when fear still lingers. For the first time in years, John allowed himself to imagine a future not of 2, but of 3. A family, broken once, now slowly mending. And though uncertainty still lived in his heart, hope had begun to take root. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to change for John and Ethan. What had once been a quiet home, filled only with the sounds of a father and son, was now touched by another presence. Olivia came often, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes helping. With homework, sometimes simply sitting on the couch as Ethan talked endlessly about his drawings and school adventures. John still watched her carefully. He had not forgotten the pain of her leaving. Yet every day he saw the way Ethan's eyes lit up when she entered the room. The boy's heart had already forgiven what John's heart still wrestled with. That innocence, that ability to love without fear, made John both proud and afraid. One evening, as the 3 of them shared dinner, Ethan suddenly asked, "Mommy, why did you go away before?" His small voice carried no anger, only curiosity. The fork slipped slightly from John's hand. He had never wanted his son to carry that question. Olivia set down her glass, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at Ethan with tender eyes. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I made mistakes. I was young, and I was afraid. I thought I could not be a good mother. I thought leaving was the best choice, but I was wrong. I should have stayed." I should have held you close every day of your life. Ethan tilted his head, thinking. But you're here now, he said simply. Then he smiled, as if that was enough. John's chest tightened. His son's forgiveness was immediate, but his own was not so easily given. Later, when Ethan went to bed, John turned to Olivia. He does not understand the weight of what happened, but I do. Words alone will not heal what was broken. No, Olivia whispered, and I will spend every day proving that I mean what I say. The following week brought an unexpected turn. Olivia asked John if he could meet her at her office after work. At first, he hesitated. He did not want to step into her world of suits, polished floors, and powerful voices. He felt out of place in his worn jacket and work boots, but she insisted, saying there was something he needed to hear. That evening, John walked into the tall, glass building that bore Olivia's name on the wall. It felt strange, stepping into a world so different from his own. The lobby was grand, filled with marble floors and shining lights. He stood awkwardly until Olivia appeared, greeting him warmly. She guided him to a quiet office at the top floor, where the city lights stretched endlessly outside the window. "Why am I here?" John asked, his voice guarded. Olivia sat across from him, her face serious. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Not only about me, but about why I left." John's eyes narrowed. "I thought I already knew. You walked away." She shook her head. "It was not that simple. Yes, I walked away, but not because I did not love you or him. I was pressured. My family believed I would never succeed if I carried the weight of raising a child so young. They told me I would ruin my future. They convinced me to choose career over family. At the time, I was too weak to fight them. I let fear control me." Her words hit John like a storm. He had always imagined her leaving as a choice of coldness, not weakness. Hearing that others had influenced her did not erase the pain, but it shifted something inside him. "I became the person they wanted," Olivia continued, her voice trembling. "I built a career. I became a leader. I gained everything that looked powerful on the outside. But none of it gave me peace. Every night I thought of him. Every success felt empty because it was built on a broken promise." She leaned forward, her eyes glistening. "When I saw him in the hospital, I felt something I cannot explain. He knew me, John. Without being told, without ever meeting me, he knew. That is not chance. That is love that never truly dies." John's throat tightened. He wanted to fight her words, to hold on to his anger, but part of him could not deny what he had witnessed. Ethan's recognition had been too natural, too deep. Silence filled the room for a long moment. Then John finally spoke, his voice low. "Do you know what it was like for me? To raise him alone, to carry everything, to watch him cry at night asking for someone I could not give him. Do you know how many times I wanted to hate you, but I could not, because every time I looked at him, I saw you?" Tears slid down Olivia's face. "I know I cannot take away what I did, but I can give him a mother now. I can give him the love he deserves, and I can stand beside you if you let me, not to erase the past, but to build a better future." John turned away, looking out the window at the glowing city. He felt torn between two worlds, the one he had carried alone and the one that now offered a chance for something more. When he finally turned back, his eyes were heavy with emotion. If you want to be in his life, then you will have to prove it every single day. I will not protect myself from pain, but I will protect him. Do not forget that. Olivia nodded firmly. I would not expect less. That night, when John returned home, Ethan was already asleep. John sat at the edge of his bed, watching his son's peaceful face. He thought of the drawings taped to the wall, the ones that showed 3 figures holding hands. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe those drawings might not only be a dream. The revelation had shaken him. It had reopened wounds, but also revealed truths he had not considered. Olivia had not only left because of fear, but because she had been pushed by those around her. That did not erase her choice, but it explained the silence. And now, she was fighting to return, not with excuses, but with honesty. John whispered, into the quiet room, "We may be broken, Ethan, but maybe we can heal." The next morning, when Olivia arrived to take Ethan to the park, John watched as his son ran to her with open arms. The sound of Ethan's laughter filled the air, pure and bright. And though John's heart still carried scars, he realized something important. Sometimes revelation is not about answers that fix everything. Sometimes it is about opening a door, even when the past feels too heavy. For the first time in years, John felt the possibility of forgiveness. Not just for her, but for himself too. Spring had arrived, and the city seemed lighter somehow. Flowers bloomed in the park where Ethan loved to run, and sunlight poured through the windows of the small apartment John and his son shared. Life had changed slowly, almost imperceptibly, at first, but the difference was real. Olivia had become a steady presence. She did not come and go like before. She arrived with consistency, bringing warmth and laughter, filling the spaces that had once been quiet. John watched Ethan and Olivia play with a small kite in the park. Ethan ran with the wind tugging at his small body, his laughter carrying across the open space. Olivia followed closely, keeping her hands ready to steady him when he tripped or stumbled. She did not hover. She did not force attention. She simply walked beside them both, gentle and patient, letting the moment unfold naturally. John stood back, leaning against a tree, his hands in his pockets. He had learned to watch, to listen, to let the boy guide the relationship. And he had learned to watch Olivia as well, seeing the care she showed, the quiet dedication in every gesture. For months, he had struggled with fear. Fear that she would leave, fear that she would fail again. But seeing her here, steady and committed, allowed him a small sense of relief he had not expected. Ethan's laughter called John's attention. He ran to join them, scooping his son into his arms for a brief spin. Ethan squealed with joy. Olivia clapped her hands and cheered. The three of them were together in a simple, ordinary moment, yet it felt extraordinary to John. Later, as the sun began to set, they sat on a bench, tired but happy. Olivia handed Ethan a small snack she had packed. He munched quietly, occasionally glancing up at her with wide eyes. "Thank you for being here," John said finally, his voice low. He did not look at her immediately, focusing on Ethan instead. "For staying, for trying. It is not easy for any of us." Olivia smiled softly. "I do not expect forgiveness all at once. I only want to be part of his life, part of yours. I want to do right. Not only for him, but for both of us." John nodded. He thought about the weeks, the months, the small steps they had taken. He thought about the nights he had spent worrying, about the anger and sadness he had carried. And he thought about Ethan, whose heart had accepted Olivia without hesitation. Perhaps that had been the key all along. Children could forgive with simplicity adults struggled to achieve. Back at home, the evening passed quietly. John helped Ethan with his homework while Olivia prepared a small dinner. The sounds of their voices mixed, filling the apartment with a gentle rhythm. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. The healing came in the small, steady actions. After dinner, Olivia asked John to join her for a short walk outside. The night was calm and the streets glowed softly under the streetlights. For the first time in a long time, John felt able to speak freely without fear. "Do you remember the first time we met at the hospital?" Olivia asked, her voice quiet. John nodded. "I remember. I was scared, and so was he. but he recognized you before I could even understand what was happening." "That moment changed everything for me," Olivia said. "I realized then that I could not lose him again, and I could not lose the chance to be part of your life either. I wanted to make things right, not with words, but with every day we spend together." John looked at her. The woman standing beside him was no longer just the CEO he had feared or resented. She was someone willing to fight for family, someone willing to be patient and kind, someone willing to face her mistakes and try again. "I was afraid," John admitted. "Afraid that I would be hurt again, afraid that he would be hurt. But seeing you here, seeing the way you care, I think maybe we can find a new path." Olivia reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his. "A path together?" John nodded slowly, a small smile forming on his lips. "Yes, together, for him and for us." The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of pancakes and laughter. John and Olivia had decided to start small traditions, building a sense of family that had once seemed impossible. Ethan jumped out of bed, running to the kitchen, where Olivia flipped pancakes while John poured juice. The boys' laughter filled the apartment, a sound that had become a source of healing and hope. Throughout the day, they played in the park, went to the library, and read stories together at home. Each moment was simple, ordinary, yet profound. John realized that family was not about perfection. It was about presence, about showing up even when the past was painful. In the evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, John and Olivia sat on the couch. Silence stretched comfortably between them. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Olivia said, "Thank you for letting me in. I do not take it lightly. I know I have to earn this every day." John took her hand, holding it gently. "We will figure it out together. It will not always be easy, but it will be worth it." Over the next months, the apartment grew warmer with shared laughter, quiet conversations, and small acts of care. Ethan thrived, his health and happiness flourishing with the attention and love from both parents. John noticed that he no longer feared the future as he had before. He could imagine birthdays, school plays, and family dinners without the constant worry that he would have to face alone. One afternoon, as Ethan painted a picture of a sunny park with 3 figures holding hands, John looked at Olivia and smiled. "He already sees us as a family," he said softly. Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. "And we will make sure he always feels that way." John realized then that healing did not mean forgetting the past or pretending it had not hurt. Healing meant choosing to move forward despite fear, choosing love and patience over resentment. It meant standing together as a family, no matter how fragile the beginnings might seem. That night, as they tucked Ethan into bed, John kissed his son's forehead and whispered, "We are all here for you, buddy. Always." Olivia joined him, placing her hand over his and smiling. Ethan, half asleep, murmured, "I love you both." For the first time in years, John felt complete. The past was still there, but it no longer held power to define their lives. Together, they had begun something new, a family built not on perfection, but on forgiveness, love, and hope. Outside, the city lights shone quietly, a reminder that life continued. Inside, a small apartment held laughter, warmth, and a future that John had once thought impossible. And for the first time, he believed in the promise of tomorrow. The new beginning had come, not with grand gestures, but with patience, presence, and a willingness to heal. And as they sat together, 3 hearts connected in trust and love, John knew that they would face whatever came next together.